Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Monday, July 21st. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So today marks the one-year anniversary of Joe Biden's announcement that he was withdrawing from the 2024 presidential race. Also today, the Democratic Party have their after-action report on that race. It's been roundly criticized for avoiding questions about Biden and Harris while criticizing the spending of outside Democratic groups. So, Tom, what do you make of this date in history? And what about the Democrats' takeaways from the campaign?
Well, they're still trying to learn the lessons of 2024. And we're seeing that emerge now with, the different candidates. We've got a socialist/communist running for mayor of New York. But we also had Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky and South Carolina. He looks like he might run for president. So they're trying to figure out exactly what went wrong. But I remember when Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Remember, he was homesick basically with COVID, and he was holed up in his house, and he was under a lot of pressure. And then he came out, and if you remember, he didn't immediately endorse Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. And the question that everybody was asking and continues to ask to this day, I think a lot of folks, and certainly we were asking it, is how can he not be up to campaigning, but can be up to governing? I mean, he spent another 6 months in office as president of the United States, despite the fact that he dropped out after that terrible debate. And so, look, a lot of the blame has to go on Biden. A lot of the blame for 2024 has to go on Harris in her campaign. But whether Democrats are going to learn these lessons about why they lost ground with young men, with Hispanics, with these different groups that have been crucial parts of their coalition for decades, I think the jury's still out, and we're going to find out a lot more in the coming weeks and months as the different factions of the party sort of hash things out.
Carl, was it a winnable race at all, do you think? Or, just based on the record of the Biden administration, put Trump aside, put Kamala Harris aside, just running on that record, was it a winnable race?
I think that made it hard for Kamala Harris. It would have made it harder for Joe Biden. The vice president, then Vice President Harris, made it even harder on herself by her stubborn refusal to come up with a single thing she'd have done different from Joe Biden. And I understand why it was a difficult thing. She was still serving for the guy. He had basically handed her the nomination. I mean, it was a delicate thing, but if you have this open border and you have spiking inflation and you have the working middle class thinking that government's no longer working well for them, and you can't think of one single thing you'd have done differently, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan that it went so poorly and got Americans killed. She was basically running, for a Biden third term. People didn't want a Biden third term. And in terms of whether she herself was a good candidate, Andy, you'll remember this. 1 year ago this week, legacy media was so happy that Biden had stepped aside. The Democrats had spent the previous 3 weeks trying to get rid of him, to the point of buttering him up was their main strategy. You're George Washington, they told him. You have to do for the good of the country what George Washington did. Nancy Pelosi, Tom and I mention this every chance we get. She proposed him for Mount Rushmore. They were trying to butter him up because they knew he had a fragile ego and they wanted him to step aside. Well, he finally did. Problem with Kamala Harris is that she had better poll numbers at the outset. Her numbers actually declined. So they spent all this money, $1 billion, and they got negative net votes. So they're going to do a postmortem, but they don't want to point fingers. The DNC spokesperson said today, this is not a blame game. There's a little blame game. They say the campaign should have attacked Trump more, which is, right. I assume I first saw that, I thought it was satire. They'd compared him to Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin for 8 years by that point. And so you couldn't attack. They've impeached him twice. They took away his money, sued him. He was shot. And they threw the kitchen sink at this guy. And they needed to prop up Harris. So if that's really in the, I haven't seen that in the report. There was a reference to that. If that's really in the report, that's just stupid. But in fairness to the Democrats, they shouldn't be wanting to rerun the 2024 campaign. Hunter Biden seems to want to do it, but they shouldn't do it. What they should do is say, where are we going to be as a party? We need working class whites, working class Latinos. We need suburban women who are, we need this powerful new constituency, the Democratic Socialists and all these young people. We need them all. So what are the policies that would lead us there? That's a worthwhile exercise. So in fairness, that's what the Democrats should be doing. I'm not sure that this report went about it in the right way, but that is what a political party should do.
Yeah, it does remind me. I mean, when the Republicans went through this sort of rethink, and it famously came up with the idea that they needed to include all those groups, or some of those groups you just talked about, Latinos and whatnot. Thought they would go in one direction. Then Trump sort of came and just knocked over the whole chessboard.
Well,
right?
He did all the opposite of the things that was in the Post-Mortem.
But the irony of course, is that he ended up attracting some of those voters that the initial report was looking for. And, Tom, so I wonder about that. I mean, it does seem like that is missing from this report, at least what I've seen of it so far. They're talking about spending too much money on television, and they're talking about, as Carl said, not spending enough time attacking Trump, and not really dealing with the fact that they were very unpopular with some of the base voters that they need if they're going to get back in the White House.
Right. And that's the part where it shows you they don't get they do not get the lessons of 2024. And there is a certain, section of the Democratic base that's just in denial. I mean, they don't want to understand what happened sort of fundamentally. I think there is a section of the Democratic Party that says, look, it was a close election and we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just need to tweak things here and there and we'll be fine. And there's another section like Rahm Emanuel and some other folks who are saying, look, we need to face some hard truths here and we need to get reoriented to where working class people in America are, or we're going to be in trouble. They cannot afford to lose, 42% of the Hispanic vote and continue to have trouble with white voters. That is going to spell doom for them. So, it's interesting how politics ebbs and flows. I mean, when Barack Obama was elected, right, in 2008, everyone thought that was the absolute end of the Republican Party. I mean, he won so overwhelmingly, won with independents, brought in all these new voters, young voters. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, Republicans are going the way of the Whigs. And Trump comes along, and when the Republicans are in the wilderness, throws out the script and comes up with something new. And next thing you know, they're in power. Now we're talking about the Democrats being a regional party, unless they get their act together. So they'll eventually figure it out, but it may not be in 2028. I mean, we'll see. They may have to lose, another time or maybe two more times before they actually hit rock bottom and do some reevaluation. So we'll see. Because right now, the energy is on the left wing of the party still.
Tom, can I say something that I'm not minimizing how difficult it is to deal with these socialists and incorporate them into the main body of the party. We're seeing that in all these big American cities. But here's how quickly it can change. In the summer of 1992, Bill Clinton was running third in the polls behind President Bush, George Bush, and Ross Perot. I had people on the record, and I was covering national politics for night reader newspapers, tell me, we're worried we won't qualify for federal matching money. Remember, that's how campaigns were funded for that brief period, because he's going to finish such a distant third, he won't carry enough states, Bill Clinton. In an 8-day period, 8 days, Ross Perot dropped out of the race. He later got back in, but he dropped out. Clinton picked Al Gore. The Democrats had their convention. It was the first peaceful convention they'd had in living memory. And Clinton shot to the top of the leaderboard, and he never surrendered that lead until he left office after 2 terms as president. Never trailed a Republican again in a poll. So things can turn quickly.
Right.
But what had happened prior to that, Carl? They'd gotten, they lost in 1980, and then they got their ass kicked in 84 to the point where they only won a single state. I mean,
and lost.
They had hit bottom. They had hit bottom.
That's right.
And they had nominated Mondale. I mean, they had gone to the point. So Bill Clinton, here comes Bill Clinton. And again, he was an asterisk. I mean, where did he finish in New Hampshire? Right, the comeback kid. I mean,
he finished second, and he pronounced himself the comeback kid. He hadn't won. I mean, it was
right, but he started at 0% in that primary. I mean, he was a nobody. Nobody even really heard of him. And next thing you know, he's the standard bearer of the party. So maybe there's someone in the Democratic Party now that is at an asterisk.
Well, you're talking about Andy Bashir, probably.
Could be.
Using that analogy, yeah.
Well, yeah. Or they may need to lose again, before we get to that point.
Or maybe we're wrong, and the Democratic Socialists will somehow come out on top, and they'll end up jiu-jitsuing the party and riding it all the way to the White House. Anything could happen.
We're never wrong, so
right. Okay.
Well, we're all over the map on this one. One of us is bound to be right.
Right. All right. Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. It's Monday. We'll be back right after these words. Tom, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, released documents about Russiagate. Here's what she said in her press release about this big document dump. She says, quote, President Obama and his national security cabinet members manufactured and politicized intelligence to lay the groundwork for what was essentially a years-long coup against President Trump. Matt Taibbi says it's damning stuff that exposes the Trump-Russia hysteria as a complete and utter fake and should obliterate the reputations of the commercial news media. There is no answer to these documents. So what's in these documents, and what have we learned? And is anyone going to go to jail for this?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard was on Maria Bartiromo's show over the weekend, Sunday Morning Futures, and basically said, look, I think we have she's referring this stuff to the Justice Department. She said, I think we have the evidence, and there needs to be accountability. No matter who you were, what position of power you were in, there needs to be accountability. And certainly, I think there are folks on Trump supporters who've been arguing for years that someone should go to jail for what happened. Now, obviously, the other side of this is Democrats are saying, look, there's not a lot new here. She's overstating the case. This is not some big conspiracy, treasonous sedition, as she called it. And here's the other distinction that's being made. Critics are saying Tulsi Gabbard is talking about hacking the election, right? Russia being able to actually go into vote machines and change the tabulation and change the actual outcome of the election. That's different than, Vladimir Putin wanting to influence the election and running sort of influence operations and buying Facebook ads, et cetera, to try and help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. But to me, the most important thing was that, there was this initial presidential daily brief, PDB, that was going to be scheduled to happen and got pulled back. And then they had this meeting at the White House on December 9th, where Obama basically, and she released the list of everybody who was there, and it was all the usual suspects, right? Clapper, Comey, Brennan, Susan Rice, and the like, saying, and Obama is the one apparently gave the directive that we need to prepare a new sort of intelligence community assessment on Russia's operation and influence in the 2016 election. That eventually came out days before Donald Trump took office. And that served as sort of the predicate. And by the way, the other thing that should not be surprising to people, but when you see it in real time, is that after that secure meeting that took place in the White House Situation Room on December 9th, that evening and the next day, there were stories in the Washington Post and in the other media outlets from leaks from that meeting, sort of promoting this idea that Russia had been involved and they're going to do a new assessment and all these things. So I think it is kind of damning as I look at it and assess that. I think it shows there was a coordinated effort, and that basically sort of served as the baseline for all of the stuff that came after that, all of these leaks, all of the reporting, all of the, innuendo about Donald Trump being a Russian asset and agent and all of that crap that just flowed and basically hamstrung his presidency from the beginning. And he had to battle against it for the entire time he was in office.
No. Well, Carl, Tom did a good job laying it out for us, but therefore what, as my old friend Ben Wattenberg used to say, what does this mean? And, what's going to happen next?
Let's take a step back, because Tom laid it out. The Democrats, Jim Himes, the ranking Democrat on House Intelligence Committee, said over the weekend, called what Tulsi Gabbard was saying a lie. I don't think it's a lie, but it may be misleading, and it may not mean what Tulsi Gabbard and even Matt Taibbi, I'm a great fan of his work. He's a very talented and dedicated reporter, but it may not mean what they think it means. The first assessment that was released is that Russia couldn't hack the elections, couldn't get into the election machines. I'm not even sure if that's true, that they can't, but that was the assessment. They pulled that And then so they could come out with this more damaging assessment. But it's a little bit apples and oranges because the damaging assessment says they were trying to influence the election. I think what you asked me, Andy, is interesting because it's the last thing Tom said. So this decision is made to warn the American people that the incoming president may be compromised, A, or B, to weaponize the intelligence services of this country to besmirch the reputation and hamstring an incoming Republican president. Those are the two narratives. What is disappointing to me and disquieting and should concern everyone is how the legacy media just bought one narrative whole cloth, just swallowed it whole and regurgitated it, never questioned. Because if you had headlines in the Washington Post and the New York Times that said, the outgoing Obama administration is engaged in a very spirited public relations committee to make American voters think that Trump's in bed with Russia. If they had framed it that way, people would have said, well, is that really what an outgoing president should do? And what's his motivations, Obama's? What's going on here? And what is the evidence really? The media was so incurious, not only about the motivations of these leaks, which almost by definition are illegal. They're leaking classified information. No mention of that. Why would someone, and why do the leaks all run in the same direction? Why is all the information, you would have expected the journalist of my day, when I was a young reporter, to be more intellectually curious and more dispassionate and more even-handed about how that information was reported. And I think in hindsight, that looks just as bad now as worse now than it did at the time.
Don't worry, Carl. Jake Tapper's, it's on his list of things to get to. He's going to write a book about it.
I teed it up for you, Tommy. Knock it out of the pack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, this is part of, and if you remember, the media joined the resistance in 2016 and 2017. I mean, they openly said that they were going, that this is when all this objective stuff got thrown out the window and, newsrooms were no longer going to be both sidesing it and all that stuff. I mean, it was very clear that the legacy media had thrown in against Donald Trump. And you look at any study that was done, I mean, his coverage in the first 100 days and his first 4 years in office, and even now, I mean, was universally negative. Mm-hmm. And so,
Andy, you weren't here.
And this was a big part of it, was feeding this whole nonstop drip about Russia.
Andy, you were off Friday, but so we couldn't have because Tom and I lacked the technical capabilities to gin up the "You cannot be serious" rant from John McEnroe. So Tom wore a T-shirt that said, "So people who saw the podcast, you cannot be serious." I think I'm going to get one up. I'm going to gin up a T-shirt, Tom, that says three cheers for both siderism. It looks better all the time, doesn't it?
Well, one of the things that strikes me about this is just the degree to which right now this administration is trying to lay it on Obama's door directly. I mean, they're really not just tied to the Intelligence Committee, but to Obama himself. And that memo that you mentioned, Tom, sort of does that, where in the in a meeting, he sort of is giving the direction. Trump puts out, his tweet, or whatever you call it now, is a social media posting showing Obama sort of in jail. Total fantasy, you think, or is there any? Could they go after the president on this?
I think people whose dream and desire is to see Barack Obama, frog marched out of his mansion in Martha's Vineyard, right, and thrown into a van like that.
Army Navy Country Club where he's golfing.
That is not going to happen. But I do think there is a possibility. We saw, and this was from John Radcliffe's earlier report, that it looks like that John Brennan perjured himself before Congress in his testimony when he said the Steele dossier was not used as part of the intelligence assessment. And then we later have an email from him saying, yes, we're going to use that. We want to include that. He, over the advice of two of his subordinates, he said, no, we're going to include that. So there is a possibility that there's some accountability and there might be some criminal referrals and some legal action against some of the perpetrators of this, John Brennan being the main one, but maybe James Clapper and others. But I don't think.
Tom,
They
can
like
I
to
s-
say nobody's above the law, but I think in this instance, Barack Obama might just be above the law. I don't know that it'll ever get to a point where he is in legal jeopardy.
can I explain briefly why this is a terrible idea?
Yes, briefly.
Where does it end? I mean, so the next administration is a Democrat, so then they're going to indict Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, where does this end? We need to, we need to sue for peace here, and we need to stop criminalizing policy differences. And at this point, I don't care who started it. I'd like to figure out how you end it.
Yeah. Well, that will
I mean,
be
that's Carl, that's a gentle thing to say after, they brought how many lawsuits against Trump and tried to bankrupt him and throw him in jail. And that was like, there was a
Turn the
concerted
page.
effort to do that. But now it's like, okay, we're just going to lay down our arms and make everybody, like that's the problem with these things is you get in this Hatfield and McCoy sort of vicious cycle. I mean, and now Republicans, they want accountability and they want justice. And I can understand that desire if you're a Trump supporter, to not just unilaterally disarm and let this go, just let bygones be bygones.
Well, they should read the Sermon on the Mount then and come to their senses.
Okay.
Well, we'll have them do that, Carl. This weekend, Minneapolis made some news because the Democratic Farm Labor Party, which is basically the Democratic Party out there, endorsed the Democratic Socialist candidate, Omar Fattah. This was over the incumbent mayor, whose name is Jacob Frey, or Fry, I guess. This is another ranked choice election. It's going to be held on November 4th. But is it another tea leaf that the Democrats are moving in the direction of the social
Communism.
democratic socialism, I guess we call it.
That's what they call themselves. They certainly are in the big cities of America. You almost have two parties right now among the Democrats. They're going to unite behind a nominee in 3 years and run for president. We've been talking about that. But in the meantime, is this guy who wants to defund the police? Would he be a good mayor for Minneapolis? You know what? That's for the residents of the Twin Cities to decide. But there's a trend here. He's also a Muslim. He's the son of immigrants. You have these people, often people of color, who come up who have views that you once not that long ago would have disqualified you from consideration of high public office or the top office in a city or a state. It doesn't anymore. And we saw these polls. We've commented. We've written about them. How you have a whole generation of Americans who open mind about socialism, and where did we think this was going to end up? Well, we see where it's ending up, and this is fascinating. But to endorse this guy over sitting mayor, who by the way is very woke and very liberal, you couldn't be more progressive than the current mayor. But he may be the wrong color for big city Democratic political machines. It's a very interesting race. And I don't know anything. I'd never heard of this guy until this weekend. I'd not heard of Mamdani before he ran. Why would anybody outside of, he was an obscure state legislator in New York. These people have come to the fore and they've got these phrases, defund the police. They don't want to send police officers to domestic squabbles. We thought these things were settled on the side of victims. Not everything. Every generation decides on itself. So I think this is very interesting, and we've learned you can't count him out. You can't rule this out at all.
Tom, is it? Does it mean anything, or is this sort of just again one of these sort of just an incident in the middle? Because if you read the stories about the convention itself, there was sort of like they're going to challenge this. And the convention because the way the votes were done late at night.
Of course, it means something. I mean, it shows the trend within the Democratic Party. I would have given Jacob Fry my same advice that I gave to David Hogg, which was, you transition as soon as possible to head off. You got to work your way up the hierarchy of the victimized, because just being a woke white guy at the bottom, you're going to get left behind. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, as Carl mentioned, this guy's the incumbent. He's a sitting mayor. He worked the city, managed the city through George Floyd. And you remember there was a video of him, like he was getting yelled at and got basically sort of run out of like a public meeting there. And then there were pictures of him, like breaking down in tears at George Floyd's funeral. I mean, this guy is as left-wing as you could possibly be, and it still wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. And so I think this is just, we talked in the first segment about have Democrats learned the lesson from the 2024 election? There's like the national scene and then there's the local scene. And certainly in New York, in my city of Chicago, now in Minneapolis and other places, LA. I mean, San Francisco is the only city that maybe moved a tick away from, the progressive left in recent years. Everybody else, they're still going left.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You mentioned Portland. I mean, do these cities that have gone so far left, are they the first ones to sort of turn around and go back to the center? That's kind of interesting phenomenon.
That's right. And the other thing is, we shouldn't discount local politics and personalities. I mean, Mamdani was running against a sort of singularly unpopular political figure in Andrew Cuomo. And the Fry thing, we don't know enough about, but apparently he wasn't enough. That's what Tom said. It wasn't enough. I can't think it was strictly skin color. There have to be other issues in Minnesota. But a person who says we should defund the police is a person who is inadvertently calling for poor people and people of color to be victimized by criminals. That's where that leads. And you'd hope there are going to have to be people in the Democratic Party to pick up the theme we started this show with. We're going to have to stand up to that and say, that's not the answer. And, we criticized Joe Biden. President Biden said that very explicitly during the campaign when he ran and as president. He thought defund the police was stupid and they should not use that slogan.
Yeah. But you see, he didn't win. So maybe it's not as bad a slogan as you think. Carl,
and they ran him out of town and they got rid of him.
Bernie and AOC were ones, they wanted to defund ICE and look, they're out there fighting the oligarchy right now.
Right. Yeah. But Carl, this is going to be another one of these ranked choice elections. And this may work in the incumbent mayor's favor this time because there's a whole bunch of sort of 2 or 3 other sort of left of mayor candidates in the race, and he may emerge victorious.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it turned out ranked choice voting, which we thought was so important in New York, didn't really affect the outcome.
That's true. That's true. Well, one more story I got to get your guys' thoughts on. Donald Trump, Carl, he says he wants the Washington Commanders to change their name back to the Redskins. He said, quote, he won't make a deal for them to build a stadium in Washington if they don't do so. He also thinks Cleveland should do the same. The Indian, or the Guardians, as they're called now, should go back to being the Indians. He said, quote, the Indians are being treated very unfairly.
By themselves.
Are we going to go back to the Redskins and the Indians? And
real quick on the Indians. The Indians was a name that had long since gone away, and there had been calls to get rid of it long before George Floyd. Remember, they had Chief Wahoo. It was a caricature, and they were going to eventually change that name. And Guardians is a perfect name. People who are unfamiliar with Cleveland, there are these huge statues, Guardians of Traffic. They're called these huge statues, and it's a very iconic thing in Cleveland. It was a natural change, and people have adopted it there, and that's what the Democrats like to say. That's settled law. The Washington Redskins was a more interesting thing because there were calls to get rid of that name long before this, the reawakening came along. And for years, the Washington Post, most of its columnists and writers wouldn't even use the term. You had to read, you didn't notice it right away, the Washington football team. Then after, and Dan Snyder said he would never change the name. So he put out a Trumpian thing in all caps, actually. And 2 things happened. Three things. The team started losing. Dan Snyder was probably the least popular owner in sports. He was just, no one liked him. Everyone, he was widely hated in this city and around the league. But then the Washington Post commissioned a poll. Are Native Americans in this country offended by the name? Turns out they weren't. Overwhelmingly not offended by the name. And a large portion of people, more than were offended by the name, said it made them feel proud. And so Redskins,
so Trump is right. So once again, Carl is on Team Trump.
Well, there was a
time in 2 weeks, right?
And then they changed it into the Washington football team, which was really stupid.
That was my favorite.
Yeah.
I love that. I thought that
then,
Tom,
then
I thought
did
that was the appropriate name for a
and
bureaucratic, faceless organization.
And then this he's a Ravens fan, people. Anyway, then they had this, committee, and they picked the commanders, which people just initially despise the name, but it's caught on. Trump's a late.
Terrible name. Terrible.
I don't like it. It's three
Tom,
syllables for the
we
city,
got a minute
three
here.
syllables.
Carl is filibustering
three syllables
here
for the thing. But what happened was the team got good again. And under Jaden Daniels, their quarterback, people now like it. The name's caught on. It's going to stay. Trump's too late.
Besides,
it's not
name. Tom,
it's not his business.
Tom, we got a minute. I'm going to give you the last word.
I'm trying to get in the last word. I'm filibustering.
You are filibustering.
Well, as a Seahawks fan, I really have no dog in this fight. If they come for the Seahawks, though, you can bet that I will be spitting fire over that. Look, this is one of those things, like, we get caught up in this hysteria and times change and, all that stuff. I never had a problem with the Redskins name. I didn't understand why they changed it. I don't have a problem with the Indians name, quite frankly. I think all of these teams, to be named, to have your team named something it's prestigious. It's not, they didn't name the team the Indians because they wanted to make fun of them or denigrate them or anything. It was it's elevating them. It's putting them, at the center of your city and culture, and people love they love their teams. And so to change their names because a couple people are offended here or there seems stupid to me from the beginning. So I would go back to all of the old names if possible, but I know that's probably not going to happen. All
right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I will say one quick thing about my Baltimore Ravens. It's the best name in all of sports. It's because it has
literary.
It's literary. It's a reference to Edgar Allan Poe, who was born in Baltimore. And I don't think there's
another team. Colts? You're not a Colts fan?
No. I think the Ravens was an improvement. Who cares about the Colts? I mean, really? Come on. Anyway, topic for another day. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. And for our next segment, RCP contributor Maggie Miller talks with Real Clear Investigations writer Anna Kasparian, breaking down her latest article, which looks at the Los Angeles Police Department and at the unintended consequences of efforts to defund it. Full story can be found on RealClearInvestigations.com. And now here's Maggie Miller in conversation with Anna Kasparian.
Anna, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
So the city's policies seem to have completely backfired in all ways. Attempts to defund have seen higher costs, people are dealing with worse response times, and then officers are getting burnt out despite making insane salaries. So how did we get here, and what needs to be done?
Well, to really understand the current moment, I kind of want to take us back to give the audience some context about how Los Angeles differs from other big cities across the country. So Los Angeles, even historically, prior to 2020, prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, just really did have a much smaller Los Angeles Police Department. The number of sworn officers really lagged behind other major cities. In some cases, about half the amount of sworn officers that you would find in Washington, D.C., for instance, per capita, meaning per 100,000 residents. Now, in around, I believe it was 2014, then Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa decided to push for additional funding for the LAPD so they can increase their ranks to 10,000 sworn officers, which the force or the police department argued was the force necessary, the numbers necessary in order to, efficiently and sufficiently respond to 911 calls and keep the community safe. And LA is a massive city, millions of people. So 10,000 seemed like a reasonable number. Now, fast forward to what happened in 2020, you have all of this unrest across the country spurred by the fact that George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis police officer on camera. And that led to calls to defund the police. Now, Los Angeles, of course, is one of the bluest cities in the bluest state. So it's unsurprising that the Los Angeles City Council at the time did move to cut the LAPD budget to the tune of about $150 million. And the whole idea was we're going to take that money and instead divert it to social workers, to unarmed response teams, things like that, to kind of reimagine policing. But what actually ended up happening is some of those investments didn't really end up being as effective as the advocates argued. And at the same time, we lost police officers, sworn officers, due to the elimination of some positions, in addition to an influx of sworn officers deciding they're going to retire early because being a cop was now essentially making one a pariah in the local community. The other issue was the fact that you had city council members and candidates running for the city council focusing on the need to cut more from the police budget. So this unwelcoming environment led to early resignations or retirements, additional resignations, and also the elimination of some positions for sworn officers. Now, you can eliminate the police force, but you're not going to be able to eliminate the need for a police force. So in 2021, we really did experience this significant crime spike in LA. It wasn't unique to LA. This crime spike was similar to what was witnessed in other parts of the country that year. So the need for sworn officers increased at a time when the number of sworn officers decreased. And so the city really had no choice but to start spending big on overtime pay. And year after year, the situation has gotten a lot worse, and it's become incredibly difficult to recruit individuals who want to be police officers in LA.
So compared to other major cities, LA seems like they are getting it wrong, but are others who also went big with defund the police, are they similarly looking at this same result? Are they also at a point where they're like, oh, we thought this was going to save money, we thought this was going to do this, and in fact, it's doing the opposite of all those things?
Absolutely. I think another good example of this trend playing out is in Oakland, California. This notion that you can just, eliminate positions within a police department and that will somehow save money. It hasn't really come to fruition because of the fact that there's a reason why those positions exist. And as much as I hate to admit it, crime is real. There is a decrease in crime in more recent years, and I'm happy to see that. But now there's also increased unrest as a result of protests, demonstrations, sometimes some that devolve into riots and things like that, that require more police presence. And this is happening, of course, in response to some of Donald Trump's immigration policies. That's certainly been a situation here in Los Angeles. And so the Los Angeles City Council literally just voted to take out a $5 million loan. And we're dealing with a lot of fiscal issues here in LA, but they took out a $5 million loan in order to be able to cover police overtime just during these protests. And they've already racked up over $17 million in overtime charges just from these protests alone.
Yeah, I saw in your reporting up to $600,000. That's money that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. So obviously they're putting in the hours that then equates to that, but it also is just like if they didn't do these policies to begin with, these people would have been making more closely resembling normal salaries, and then it wouldn't be costing LA so much.
So
I have to add one other thing, because you want them to be well rested. You want to ensure they're in the right frame of mind in order to carry out their duties effectively. And what ends up happening when you have these cops that are overworked is they are more likely to make mistakes. They're more likely to have hostile interactions with the public. And that sows additional distrust toward the police force and provides fodder for the activists who would literally want to eliminate the police force entirely and replace them with these unarmed response teams, which quite frankly have been ineffective in a lot of instances. It's really been a mess, and it takes politicians who lack the type of ego our politicians have to actually recalibrate and make important and difficult decisions.
That was my follow-up. It feels like these crisis teams haven't really been set up to succeed. They're seeming to be more in a stopgap type role, and they're looking to them to solve all these major problems that LA and places around the country are facing. And I don't think that they're given the resources or the ability to really do their jobs.
I agree with you entirely on that. I mean, I'll give you one specific example that I encountered, and actually it was captured on video that went viral a few years ago. This was in West Hollywood, California, and the sheriff's department had effectively been cut in half, I believe, if I'm remembering the numbers, but don't quote me on that. But there was a divestment in regard to the LA Sheriff's Department operating in West Hollywood, and they were replaced with these unarmed response teams. And there was this road rage incident on Santa Monica Boulevard in which, like, these two dudes are at blows. Like, they're punching each other, they're hitting each other. And in the background, you can literally see members of this unarmed response team, and they're doing nothing. They're doing nothing because they don't want to intervene in any type of violent incident, even if, you know, there's no indication that either individual who's scrapping at that moment is armed. So if we're talking about social workers and mental health professionals who can respond to a situation and they're accompanied by a police officer in case something becomes violent or erratic, I'm actually all for that. I think that's a smart reform that should be, you know, I guess, included in the police department, right? I don't want social workers to be a separate thing. I think we should have mental health professionals working with police within the department. But guess what that takes? That takes more investment. Smart policing takes more investment. This ridiculous, like, let's just get rid of them attitude, this maximalist attitude has really been detrimental to cities like LA, to cities like Oakland, but more importantly, detrimental to the very communities, okay, that BLM purports to want to serve. Okay, majority Black neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are lower on the socioeconomic ladder, neighborhoods that are vulnerable to more violence. Those are the people who are now dealing with insult to injury due to the divestment in the police department, but additionally to this anti-police culture that continues to fester within our LA City Council.
That was Maggie Miller in conversation with Real Clear Investigations contributor Anna Kasparian. You can see more of Maggie's interviews on the Real Clear Politics YouTube channel and at realclearinvestigations.com. And that's our program for today. I'm Andrew Walworth, and on behalf of everyone at RCP, thank you for being here. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening.